Hey, Circle Youth, it is so great to be back with you guys. Happy New Year. I hope that your Christmas break was enjoyable despite it being a very, very different Christmas. Now, in a few moments, you're going to be able to share what drained you over the break and what gave you life. Now, as for me, it was tough not being able to see my family and friends this Christmas. So that was something that drained me. But what gave me life was spending time with my parents, of course, sleeping in, and watching a few movies. Okay, it was maybe more than a few movies. It was more along the lines of upwards of 20. But most of those were marathoning Harry Potter and Lord of the Rings. So it was pretty good. That gave me life for sure. So why don't you guys go ahead, take the next few minutes to briefly talk about something that drained you over the break. And of course, something that gave you life and on a positive note. So go ahead, take a few minutes, and we'll be right back after. Wow, it's hard to believe that we've, punted 2020 already and that we've started a new year. Things were looking up at the beginning, with Netflix Canada keeping The Office. It was a perfect start to 2021. And then, democracy was nearly torched 6 days in. So we've had some wins and we've had some L's, but I hope that your new year is filled with goodness, guys. Now, I know you're probably expecting me to ask this, but what's your New Year's resolution? Now, last year, people accomplished pretty amazing things. They won championships, go Lakers. They set world records. They released hit movies. They wrote best-selling books and topped the charts with some number one singles. And that really kind of made me wonder how many of those incredible achievements started out as a New Year's resolution. I mean, have you ever set a goal, but you had your plan interrupted or sidetracked? It happens, right? Like maybe it's because you got a little lazy or you lost focus or other responsibilities took priority or you got stuck and you weren't sure how to make it happen. Or maybe, a global pandemic happened and you had to stay at home for 9 months. That could do something. But I'd like for you to take a moment with your group and share what your New Year's resolution is, or simply a goal that you have for this year. Now, maybe your goal is to raise your grades, to learn a new skill, to get accepted to college, to get a job, to get healthier, to get TikTok famous. I know one of my goals is to beat Emmanuel at ping pong, and it's gonna happen, my guy. It's gonna happen. So, what are your goals? If I were to ask you about your goals, I'm guessing some of you would be able to share your goals immediately. Some would have to think about it for a while. And some would say that you don't really have any goals at all just yet. And that's okay. That's okay. But go ahead in your groups and take a few minutes to share in your group. What are some goals that you have for this year? All right, welcome back, guys. I want to talk about a goal that I never completed. Now, when I was younger, in high school, it wasn't that long ago, but it was some years ago. But when I was in high school, grade 9 and 10, I wanted to audition for some sort of talent competition. I'm not talking about just locally, but like America's Got Talent and something crazy like that. Like I wanted Simon Cowell to roast me. Now, obviously, it never happened, but I really wanted it to. And I came close. And I made it one of my goals. I wanted to do it, but I couldn't go to America and join America's Got Talent. But one year, they decided to launch Canada's Got Talent. And they toured across Canada. And I never went and auditioned. And I was like, oh, you know what? Maybe I'll just catch it next season. And I'll drive out to Edmonton or Calgary and I'll audition there. But the thing is, the ratings were so bad, like so bad that they canceled it after one season. So that was a goal that I never got to complete. Now, never say never, but it's been something that I haven't been able to complete just yet. Now, at your age, it's normal to feel like you're struggling to set or achieve goals. And when you're a teenager, you're still trying to figure out who you are and who you want to be. You're still trying to figure out, it's hard to think far into the future. It's hard to get or stay disciplined. You don't have total independence or control over your life or time. But even though setting and achieving goals can be difficult at your age, look, I'm convinced that you can change the world, not someday, but today. Our young people, that's you have the power to be change makers. And it all starts with the goals that you set. But for right now, I want you in your groups to think about this question. What's one goal that you set but you never accomplished? And why did your goal get sidetracked? So go ahead, take a few minutes and share in your group. Now, in just a moment, you'll each get a sheet of paper. And yes, it's shaped like a goat. Why? Because I want you to write down a goal, but not just any goal. I want you to write down a GOAT goal, a big, bold, greatest of all time kind of goal. And maybe your GOAT goal is about what you want to accomplish or what you want to become, what you want to contribute to the world. And at the end of our time together, I'm going to ask you to reflect on that goal and either change it, add to it, or make it more specific. But for now, just write down whatever you're thinking. So go ahead. I'll give you 1 minute to do that. Go ahead. Over the next few weeks, we're going to address questions like, what goals should I have for my life? What do my goals have to do with God's goals? Maybe you've never thought about that. How can I achieve my goals? Now, to do that, I'm going to introduce you to someone from Scripture, that's the Bible, who had a big goal of his own. So let's see what we can learn from him. Now, before we get into it, a little background first. We're going to be looking at a book from the Old Testament of the Bible. That's the part where that was written before Jesus, and it's a story of the Jewish people, right? This stuff really happened, okay? So the book that we're reading is called Nehemiah, and it was written by a guy named, well, you guessed it, Nehemiah, about 140 years before this book begins. And the Jewish people were conquered by an enemy that took control of Jerusalem. You see, they destroyed the city, they burned the temple where the Jewish people would worship God, and they sent many of God's people into exile. Now, though those people, through these people called prophets, God promised to restore and rebuild Jerusalem, and that God's people would return one day. But this was still a devastating loss for the Jewish people. Like, just imagine for a moment, just imagine what it would be like to be invaded by an enemy army, and then just kicked out of your own home, your city, and your country. You'd likely lose friends and family members in the process. And if you survived, you'd be forced to adopt a new language, new laws, and new customs. And for generations, the Jewish people were heartbroken about their lost city, their lost temple, their culture, and their community. Now, after Jerusalem was destroyed and a new king took control, some of God's people began to return to Jerusalem, looking for ways to rebuild what they had lost. But it was an incredibly long process. So about 140 years after Jerusalem was destroyed, the story of Nehemiah begins, 140 years. And so Nehemiah had only ever known a Jerusalem that was occupied by enemy armies. And Nehemiah was passionate about seeing Jerusalem restored, but he wasn't just anyone. He wasn't just an anybody. He was serving in the government. He was working for the king of Persia. In Nehemiah chapter 1 to chapter 2, verse 5, look, Nehemiah had a big goal. He had a big goal. He had a big goat-sized goal, inspired by a big problem. Nehemiah already knew Jerusalem had been destroyed. Look, that was old news. But when he was told that the Jewish people were returning to Jerusalem and the walls were still in shambles, Nehemiah saw the problem. You see, there was a practical problem, right? Like without walls, God's people would be vulnerable to another attack. But there was also a spiritual problem. The city of Jerusalem was deeply connected with the Jewish people's relationship with God. Rebuilding the walls would be a way for them to honor God, but leaving them in shambles would be a sin against God. So Nehemiah wanted to see the whole nation of Israel turn back to God. So he set a God-sized goal, a God-sized goal. He wanted to find a way to rebuild the walls of Jerusalem so God's people would be protected and God would be honored. And he did, as we'll continue to see in the next couple of weeks. Jerusalem's troubles birthed in Nehemiah a goal that wouldn't just benefit himself, but would also serve his people and his God too. So his goal began with difficulty. Nehemiah's he didn't just set this goal because he needed a cool New Year's resolution. He set it because he saw a problem that needed to be solved, and he believed that he could help solve it. When Nehemiah identified the problem that needed to be solved, he grieved and he wept. Solving this problem wasn't just a fun hobby, it mattered so deeply to him. His goal also began with prayer. As Nehemiah wept, he also fasted and he prayed, and it talks about that in Nehemiah chapter 1. He knew his goal was so big that he couldn't do it by himself. And so before he made a single move, he asked God for wisdom. He asked God for guidance and for help. And then he kept praying for months. Nehemiah's goal began with God's help. Nehemiah stood up from his prayer and fasting, determined to attempt a series of impossible tasks. He knew his own wisdom and experience, they weren't enough to guarantee success, so he asked God for help. Now, the size of this goal forced Nehemiah to put all of his faith in a God who could do what Nehemiah couldn't. And so the book of Nehemiah begins with destruction, loss, grief, and tears. But you see, that's not where the story is going to end. When Nehemiah heard the news about Jerusalem's crumbling walls, he discovered an important truth. And that truth is that big difficulties can inspire God-sized goals. Big difficulties can inspire God-sized goals. So why are we talking about this guy from 2,500 years ago? What do he and his walls have to do with us today? There's so much to say about the story of Nehemiah. Like, just countless books have been written about what his story can teach us about wisdom and leadership and having a vision. And over the next few weeks, we're going to see what we can learn from him about setting and achieving goals, but not just any goals, God-sized goals. So remember that goal that you wrote down a few minutes ago? Take a look at it again. How does your goal compare to Nehemiah's goal? Is your goal inspired by big difficulty? Does it solve a problem? Does it solve a problem that impacts anyone other than you? Or is your goal mostly about what you can gain? Is your goal inspired by prayer? Is it a goal you want for yourself, or is it a goal God wants for you too? Have you ever talked to him about it? Do you need God's help to accomplish your goal? That's usually a good indication of whether or not your goal is big enough. If you're pretty sure you can accomplish the goal, it's probably a you-sized goal. A God-sized goal is a goal that likely seems impossible. When we set us-sized goals, it's kind of like running on a treadmill. We don't really go anywhere, and we're the only ones who benefit. So how can we learn from Nehemiah and set God-sized goals that can change the world? So first, begin with difficulty. And I don't mean that you need to cause difficulty for yourself. And I don't mean you need to wait until something difficult happens to you. There's difficulty happening all around us. We just have to open our eyes and notice. Now, maybe you've experienced difficulty like loss or bullying, discrimination, or difficulties with your family or health. Chances are someone has experienced the same difficulties that you have experienced. And maybe you're looking at what's been happening in America, and it's frustrating or discouraging or confusing. So how can you help? Maybe that's where your God-sized goal can begin. Now, maybe you haven't experienced very much difficulty, but you can see plenty of problems in the world around you. People are hurting, struggling, and in pain. Maybe that's where your God sized goal can begin by focusing on the needs of others. Now, we will often find our God sized goals hidden within, something that we're passionate about. You see, like Nehemiah, our passions can often be inspired by the difficulties we see or experience. And begin with prayer. If you're not sure what your God sized goals could be, start by asking God to open your eyes to the people and the needs around you. If you feel like God might be leading you toward a need or a goal, share it with people that you trust. Share it with your small group. Share it with your youth leader and see what they think. Wise people can help us set God sized goals. And begin with God's help. You see, we'll need God's help if our goals really are God sized. Just like Nehemiah was desperate for God to do something impossible, let's believe that God can do impossible things through us too. And then ask God, ask Him, say, give me the strength to do something about the pain, the hurt, and the difficulties that I see around me. So, have you chosen a goal yet? Have you dreamed big enough? If you're not sure, that's okay. Take some time. But for the next few weeks, we're going on a journey to discover what kinds of goals God might be calling us to pursue. Today is just the beginning. This week, I hope you'll think about this question. What breaks my heart? Or maybe what should break my heart? How can difficulty in your life or in the world inspire you to dream about what God can do and how you can help God do it? I know the question, what are my goals for my life, could be scary. But instead of waiting around for inspiration or cues, what if you, like Nehemiah, looked around for problems that need to be solved? Whether those problems impact you, others, or the whole world. Big difficulties can inspire God-sized goals. And I can't wait to see what kinds of God-sized goals that you begin to pursue. Now, to leave you guys with a couple of questions, think about this. What's one you-sized goal that you want to accomplish? And what difficulties have inspired that goal? And the second question is this. Do you have a God-sized goal that you want to accomplish? What is it? And what difficulties have inspired that goal? So think about it, discuss with your groups, enjoy each other's company, and we'll see you guys next week.